Today is the first day of the November 87 7-day retreat. There are people here who have never been to a retreat here. And then there are people who have been to retreat for years, many retreats, frequent retreats. People who haven't been in a long time, or maybe come once a year to retreat. So at the beginning of every retreat, the first talk, we say something about listening to a talk. And this whole relationship of the one who talks with the one who listens. One may think one has heard this lots of times, one knows about it, doesn't want to hear something over, and so the mind is off. It turns off what is being said and instead thinks its own thoughts, which is nothing new. It is leaving something old for something else old. What we're asking is whether the speaking and the listening can be new this instant, even though the words may be old, same words, similar words, and yet the very act of looking and talking out of looking and listening out of looking can be entirely new, having nothing to do with a retreat a month ago or a year ago. So can one put aside the idea that what is being said is old, is known, and listen to it as for the first time? Which means the whole state of being, one of openness, not resistance, not scanning the memory, but an awareness which unplugs the repetitive going along with something or tuning out of something. First of all, in sitting down for talk, find the most comfortable means of sitting, chair, cushions, posture, whatever is least pain-producing. One has a lot of pain while sitting in an uncomfortable or unusual posture, then the mind and body are maybe 90% occupied with dealing with that pain, and there's very little energy left for listening. So to find a comfortable way so that there's the freedom to listen and not have to worry about pain. Also often, there's been already the early sitting, then a work period, one may be tired out for the talk. First talk, one may be tired, period. People who have prepared for the retreat have done a lot of work, a lot of constant doing this and thinking of that and rushing to do this and that. So one may be tired from that, and people coming to retreat may have done a lot of preparation, working up things in the office or preparing things at home so one can leave the family for a week. Can be a tremendous amount of work and strain in that. And one is tired from that. Also sleeping at a new place. First night one may not have gotten much sleep, so one may be tired for the first talk. be good to use the rest period before the talk, if one is tired, to lie down and maybe get a nap, if that's what one can do. So there is some physical freshness too. Nervous system is refreshed. Still doesn't mean that one doesn't get tired during a talk. People tell me this quite frequently and say it is not that I'm worn out or that I haven't slept. I've slept very well, I've napped, and it's still at certain times during this talk I just completely tune out, feel tired, fatigued, and doze off. Why? Well, not just that I asked this, we asked this together. Sometimes a person raises this question. Is there something I don't want to hear or listen to, that I'm afraid of, that is threatening, frightening? If it is, can one face the threat, the anxiety, which comes up, not immediately tune out in a patterned way, sleeping, falling asleep, or turning off? One has to discover that this is happening, which takes attention, awareness of all the mechanisms of the mind and body. If one notices it, one needn't fall under the influence. If one doesn't notice it, it goes on. So, how can one listen to a talk with an openness that will be vulnerable to anxiety or pain that may be triggered? Be there with it and not tune out, turn off, resist or defend. Question as broad as this goes for our every moment of living, doesn't it? Can there be this openness, this receptivity and sensitivity to what's going on, what somebody says, and one's reactions against it, one's fear of it, or anger about it, or anxiety, and remain in touch with this whole thing? Nothing needs to be tuned out. We think we have to, because it's habitual. But it's completely survivable to be there with all the twinges and squirming and paining of this mind and body in the presence of something happening, somebody saying something, something being touched in oneself. This being in touch with something being touched in oneself is coming to life, even though it's pain that is felt, or anxiety, or wanting to run. It's coming to life, to what is actually happening in human beings, which makes it so difficult and painful to live with oneself and to live with each other. And this is what we're questioning here, whether this is possible to change, not to defend and withdraw and erect walls, or go to sleep, get sick, to be taken care of, climb under the blanket, but to face difficulty, pain, anxiety, fear, which is an ocean of suffering that affects all human beings, not just me or you or him or her. We all participate in that. And we mostly want to ignore it. distract ourselves with something more pleasant, but it never works for very long. And the pain is back. The ache of loneliness is there. Or the desire for comfort. So in the series of 7 talks, is it possible to listen and be in touch, get in touch, remain in touch? All the while seeing all the familiar and not so familiar mechanisms. Which wants to squish or turn away, ignore, distract. Just to see it all, to touch it all, to be aware. Not what am I going to do with it when I see that, but to be aware. Without doing. This awareness that we're talking about, which does not meddle or interfere or judge, is just like the sunlight and the fresh air and the wind and the rain, which are needed for the seed to sprout. When sun and air and rain and water is there, then the seed sprouts. It doesn't need to be pushed into sprouting. If there's no sun and no air and no water, then the seed remains dormant at best, or else it is a dead seed. The sun doesn't shine in order to sprout seeds. It just shines, it's just there. It doesn't rain in order to nurture the earth. It rains. And the land, which is parched and thirsty, soaks it up. And the grasses sprout visibly. We did some seeding here not long ago. It's hard to believe it was only a few months ago. Dry seed on dry earth. A lot of cracks from the dry clay. Clay seems to be one of the most inhospitable of soils. And yet look what happened. It's all covered with green. It all worked together as a whole. Including the people who saw that this parched ground needs some seeds. It was seen and felt, so somebody put it out, the seed. If one is in touch with a whole, then one sees what needs to be done. And one also sees the limits. One cannot water acres and acres of fields. At least here you can't do that. Some big acreage farmers do that. Here you can't. You have to let go of it and see what happens. put a little straw on so it doesn't roll right off the incline when the wind comes. So we started out by saying awareness, which is like this, sun and rain and water and air, takes care of what is there. Something sprouts, or something disappears, which has been a barrier, a hindrance. If it's really seen, without any reaction for or against, then it has a chance to dissipate. Just here before the talk, walking up that slope, that newly seeded slope to the pond, and walking partly around that rim. Just the beauty of the silkiness of that grass, and the distant view of the pink and silvery blue hills, and the sun bathing it all. Call of a crow here and there, and other than that, quietness. And the heart just fills with one has no words for what it is. And one wonders whether there could be a single human problem that couldn't be understood and dissolved. Filled with this love or joy, whatever word one wants to put on it. The word is not the real thing. The quietness of it all, and yet everything has a song. Not just the songbirds, which are gone now. No nest building, no mating, and therefore quiet. Maybe they've gone to warmer places. And yet the trees and clouds and the hills, the water and the earth, they're full of sound. When it is quiet, to listen, to hear. Which means the mind is not all absorbed in its own problems. Closeted, straight-jacketed. Like a cellar into which light doesn't reach. One's problems, one's rights, one's needs, one's demands, the victimization that one feels, the self-pity. The anger at this enclosure which one may blame on others. And the fear, not just the fear of the enclosure, but the fear of no enclosure. And therefore rather remaining in the cellar, which one is familiar with, has some outlets in there. Maybe some inlet, something piped in. I just just read the last few weeks or so a book which was sent to me by a young woman who once came to retreat here. She lives in Germany. She also came to one German retreat. And she sent a book of a series of drawings made by her father. They were only released and put together into a artistic form, a big book, after his death. And these pictures show the treatment he suffered in 1933 and part of 1934, captured and put into a cellar by the SA and SS, the secret police and the party members, because he was a communist. At first I thought I couldn't see 2 pages of this book. I was going to leave it in Germany. My friend there suggested to donate it to Amnesty International. They deal with such things. It was a heavy book too, a good excuse not to carry it with me. And then I thought, she sent it to me. This was her father, who after the war, incidentally, was no less persecuted. He was not Jewish because he was a communist. And if one has one's ears open, there's a lot of this type of hatred and agitation going on in this country, blaming things on stereotyping communists when none of us are free of that, and letting anything go, letting anything happen that will get rid of this evil. And here to be in touch and read the diary sketches of this man, a great idealist, wanting to do something for the workers the world over, this tremendous ideal vision of having workers of all countries, no nationality division, be a classless society, because it's totally conceived idealistically and not practically. But I was thinking of the cellar in which all this torture happened. Torture of ideologists by ideologists, with a good dose of sadism mixed in. He was, after the worst dungeon there where most of the torture happened, he was transferred to another prison which was more humane, solitary confinement, and he could look out a very high window. He could every once in a while see some young women and girls in summer dresses walking on the lawn. Bit of sunshine. He said that kept me alive. Sometimes some people congregated and waving down. People knew who was incarcerated, the relatives and friends and brides or wives, husbands. A lot of hatred in this man, tremendous amount of hatred collecting. One sees it in those pictures. And one sees in those pictures and in the hatred that is felt, the perpetuation of the same thing. hatred of those who would confine us, imprison us, torture us, and the revenge, the yearning for revenge, for turning it all upside down, becoming the victor, leaving the role of the victim to be the victor. All the while not understanding this prison in which we live, which is not made by others. We may live in a prison made by others, but one may not live in a prison even though one is imprisoned. Can one get in touch with this prison that we are creating for ourselves moment to moment? Not get in touch with it in order to break it, dissolve it, but to be aware of it. The narrowness of constant self-interest, self-concern, self-worry, self-aggrandizement, or self-deprecation. Self. Me and mine. And the rights that go with it, and the exploitation that goes with it. Self-exploitation and other exploitation. The injustices that go with it. Unfairnesses. Because self-interest is self-interest. But from that vantage point, from that cell, one cannot see the whole. It's impossible. A few spring dresses, but that's not seeing the whole. The whole is there when there's no imprisonment, when there are no barriers, no walls, when the perception is whole. Because it is not just from this point of view. And please, it sounds as though someone here was preaching selflessness. Farther from that than anything in this world. Not preaching selflessness. This is another self-centered trip to become selfless and to preach selflessness. A new garb for the self. Monks' robes or preachers' garbs. Self has to be seen and understood moment to moment as it emerges, as it all its acts, all its consequences. And not just do it for a day or for 4 days or 7 days and then forget all about it. This is the question that comes up in every retreat, wherever it's held, here or abroad or elsewhere. Yeah, during a retreat, I can see something, there's some insight and some freedom and exploding maybe of this prison, and then going back to the daily routines, to the work or the family or the lack of relationship, or living like in this building on staff, lots of people on a small space. It seems to evaporate so quickly. It just came in as a breeze and it's gone like a breeze. Why? People who go to many retreats seem to almost make a rule out of this and put up with it, that this is so inevitably. I wouldn't rest with that for one moment. I would wonder why. Not it shouldn't, but what goes on? What happens? And with that question there comes some light, because one pauses. Depends, of course, how one asks. If one asks and immediately supplies answers from the files, there's no fresh breeze, there's only the dust of the files. But if one wonders why, and then pauses, stands or sits or lies down quietly, because one has asked a tremendous question. Why is this enclosure there, and what is it? And not theorize or speculate about it, but tackle it, touch it, see it, be aware of it, listen to it. It talks. We dialogue with ourselves all the time, or monologue. But often it takes two parts, talking to oneself and talking back and taking somebody else's position. What he thinks or she would think about me. This is how we proceed internally. Can one listen to that and not just be caught in it, like in a play, but listen to it, be aware of it, that it's happening. Somebody once mentioned this, that the very famous English physicist, mathematician, Isaac Newton, who came up with these, at that time, utterly revolutionary formulations of gravity, affecting our whole idea about the solar system, relationship of the earth and the planets and sun and so forth. He observed this and formulated it mathematically, a tremendous feat, not just the observation and the mathematics of it, but the upsetting of the whole prevailing system at the time. Which was rooted also religiously, sanctioned religiously, and so forth. And somebody asked him, how could you come up with this? How did you do it? And his response was, I never ceased thinking about it. Never ceased thinking about it. Is this how we feel about what is going on with what we consider our problems or our fundamental problem? The life we lead, the problems, the difficulties. Why? We do cease thinking about it. And I use the word thinking very amply. Not just reflecting upon it, but looking as one goes. Is one that interested in it? That concerned about it? And also that aware that what one observes in oneself as a single individual human being is what goes on in all the rest of human beings, fundamentally, not superficially, but fundamentally, deeply. So that clarity brought into this confusion here, into this suffering, into this anger or depression, is clarity brought into the human mind per se. Because this is one human mind we share. We may not be aware of this, but if we watch and listen to each other, look, watch the news, talk with people in all walks of life, all share the same problems, which are loneliness, fear, anxiety, anger, envy, acquisitiveness, the wanting more, and the never getting enough, and the imprisonment of that all. Can light be shed on this like the sun shines over the whole valley and the hills and mountains and right into the gorge? Because right now there are no leaves on the trees that shade out, so even at the bottom of the creek there's sun trickling through. Is one that interested? With this interest and with the looking and listening and opening up to what's there, with that comes tremendous energy. Not the energy of self-fulfillment, but just the energy of life, which is pulsating under our feet, right in front of us, back of us, and right through us. I think one of our problems is that the mind has been trained since the earliest of times to tackle problems by thinking about them, reflecting upon them, seeking solutions through studying what great thinkers, philosophy or religion, ideology have said about things, how to change things, how to improve things. Our whole schooling is a problem-solving thinking process education. That was a long word. Taught to solve problems through thinking, through training and expanding that thinking mind, which can do incredulously fabulous things. Because it can picture and imagine things, it can build what it imagines. And what it imagines seems so utterly real that it's very difficult to see that imagination is imagination, that thinking is thinking. But with practical and technological problems, a lot of our scientific inquiries, their thinking can have some very effective results. Well, not can, we can just, all we need to look around. Last night I looked up into the sky and there was what was not an airplane, it was not a falling star, must have been a satellite sort of meandering through the constellations. It was incredible. Something human beings put up there, circling the earth and gathering information and conveying information. But in terms of our problems of relationship, problems of loneliness, or of too much relationship, it always goes hand in hand. Too little or too much. Thinking only goes so far. One can think the problem through, but the problem persists. And meanwhile, the organism and the mind is drained from all the thinking about it. it becomes depressive. Depressing. And yet we do it. Problem is mentioned, a problem is felt or seen, we begin to think about it. Mull it over, try to think of ways to solve it. Remove ourselves from it, or do this or that, remove the other person. And it's a draining process. There's no energizing in this kind of thinking. It goes in circles. Maybe if we can formulate the problem as general as possible, living together and yet not being in accord with each other, not living in harmony with each other. Living alone and wanting to be with somebody, being with somebody and not wanting the person to be that way. The grating of a person who is not the way one would like her or him to be. Too few people living with one, or too many people living there. Family, sometimes 3 children and their friends, and a husband or a wife. The radio, all the stuff that goes with our hobbies and the noise that it makes. Each one having their own particular thing that he, she likes and wants to preserve, and it collides with what others like and want to preserve or to protect, push through. Wanting more contact or having too much contact. Wanting to have solitude, coming to a place which offers that, and the mind feeling restless, needing to have noise again, activity, something to do. How do we solve this problem? Living with each other and yet having all these different wants and needs. How do we solve that problem? One person, in the last retreat in Germany, having come from what he described as a traumatic triple relationship. Trauma with one person, trauma with another, and a third person. A very sensitive, very, very receptive and compassionate person. And on day 5, he said, it took me 5 days to see this whole problem and to be clear and free of it. All I want to do now is join a monastery. We talked over our allotted 15 minutes about that. There's a relationship in monasteries. And it patterns itself according to the patterns that the individual human beings in a monastery have brought or are bringing with them and have not shed. And are maybe sanctioning through religious practice and so forth. We don't need to go into this right now. If it is something somebody wishes to take up, then we can do it in meeting. And if one goes off by oneself into a cave or a hut someplace in the woods or the wilderness, how long can one stand alone? And is one really alone, or is one's company out now all the fantasized ideas and images about oneself and life and God and solitude and emptiness? One man told me, who went on I think it was a 6 weeks completely solitary hike, strenuous hike. He let himself be dropped off by an airplane in a wilderness, glacial wilderness, and there was another point at which in 6 weeks he was going to be picked up, and if he didn't make this airplane, he wasn't quite sure whether he would be picked up. All by himself. Tremendous backpack, which was emptied as he went. He dropped things left and right. It was too much to carry. And after 6 weeks, coming close to that spot where the airplane was going to pick him up, he saw something that resembled a human being coming toward him. And he said he started running. And when he saw this person, he just put his arms around. Didn't know the person. Never met him or her. He said that tremendous hunger for another human being, just to be with another human being. So how do we live with each other? We're here, millions and billions of us. On crowded space or on less crowded space? In China or in Poland, there's sometimes 3 generations living in one apartment, maybe sometimes one large room and something called a kitchenette. And then there people live in enormous villas. And yet that problem is there. How do we live with each other? How do we live with ourselves? With children, with parents, with husband, wife, friends, and the man and woman in the street or in the store. How will we meet each other? Will we meet each other just like we said earlier in this talk, just as we will meet the anxiety and pain and anger that wells up so quickly, faster than lightning, because we're wired that way? But we'll meet it. We'll meet it just as quickly. It's possible, meet it just as quickly as it has been triggered. Not wanting to do it in or change it. The sun rays hitting the seed and the rain wetting it doesn't want to sprout that seed. It's the sun and rain and air. And the seed sprouts. It happens as a whole. Or are we so attached, so riveted to our images of ourselves that all the energy can do is defend and protect and aggrandize or put down. In that cellar, without light. We do have self-images, and we have protected them all our life. That's how we've grown up. Maybe that's how we've survived. I don't know whether self-images are necessary or not. It is a totally theoretical and speculative thing, whether it is possible to grow up as a child without them. It doesn't happen because the parents are full of images. But can we see them now, become aware of them, become aware of the defense? This tremendous defense deficit budget for our self-image. That's what it is. It's nationally and individually a constant deficit. Too much defense. If we have nothing to defend, we don't have to expend that energy. Then that energy is there to see somebody next to us without impinging immediately, don't be this way, be that way. And not impinging, there is some breathing space created for human beings around us. Breathing space, light space, rain space. Will we cease thinking about that? We do. But we do come to, we do wake up, we do become aware again. What do we do with it? Resistance? Struggle? Can we see that? Shed light on resistance and struggle? There be so much space that everything can be seen. Nothing needs to be fought or trampled under or ignored. What we defend and protect, we can't look at. That's clear, isn't it? We can't examine, open up. I meant to say at the beginning of this talk that what is said here in talks or in meetings is not to be taken as authoritative statements by one person, to be followed by other persons, to be believed in, adopted, recorded as the truth or whatever. The sole raison d'être of a talk is to participate. To participate as the talk takes place, because what is looked at is common goods, which everyone, including the one who's talking, participates and looks at. And then, if it is not clear, if it is confusing, or arouses one's resistance or anger, objection, opposition, to to keep looking at the whole thing. Everything that's aroused, you keep looking at the whole thing, like a pebble or a leaf. We saw that in Germany. There was a lake there, and every once in a while a leaf just lightly touched the surface of the lake. Pebble is pretty penetrating. A leaf just touches and floats. But that slightest of impacts, and there were waves and circles, and they expanded further and further and further. There was no end to that movement of the one leaf touching. Eventually the water, the movement of the water touched the shore, and it didn't end there. So can one look that broadly, that widely, sensitive to anything that's touched? Including the pain or anxiety that may arouse. That's part of what is being touched. It's all below the surface of that lake. And no one, that's the utter beauty of this work, no one can do this for one. It has to happen here in oneself by itself. No authority, no teacher, no God, no Buddha, no one can do this for another human being. And to take what someone else says as authoritative prevents one from looking. Taking a statement as authoritative is pulling down the shutters. But to listen and to examine it or to look and participate, then the shutters are open. Then we commune with each other. Not just communicate, but commune. Beyond the words that are being used. Oh my. We will end here for today.